Welcome back to the show where we run you through all the Dolphins news you need to know about. After the news you need to know about, we run you through the fan Q&A where we answer fans' questions. Not a ton of news to talk about on today's show. Obviously, it's the thinner part of the offseason, but we have some interesting topics nonetheless. This first news story comes from Pro Football Rumors. Tua addresses concussion recovery and offseason plans. He did his first interview with the media for the Super Bowl, like a lot of athletes do, whether they're sponsoring something or they're just doing interviews or whatever the case may be. Tua, obviously, this is the first time he's spoken in a very long time since his concussion. And obviously he confirmed that he is going to play this season. He talked about how he wanted to learn how to do judo to recover or help himself fall better. I'm not an expert on those things, so I can't confirm or deny if that actually is something that's possible. But it does bring up an interesting question, because if you're the GM of the Dolphins, if you're Chris Greer right now, and I think this is the worry of every Dolphins fan, and we've already talked about it a million times on today's show, you have this great team and this great roster. Are you willing to bet it on the health of a quarterback that hasn't finished his season the entire year? You should have 2 contingency plans for that scenario, because if he suffers another concussion, what the heck are we going to do, and what is the narrative at that point? What is the play? Like it's really interesting to and it sucks as a fan, and I would imagine as the general manager, because your roster is so good. Because again, what is the narrative at that point if he has another concussion? Is it retirement? Is he going to be out for a longer period of time, like he did in this concussion protocol? So these are all things that you have to think about, and the team itself is too good to kind of bet on that. And I think there's 2 things that they have to do in the offseason if they want to. I think there's legitimately 3 avenues they could take. I think the third one is a little bit outlandish, I would say, is the best word to describe that, because I don't think they're going to trade for a quarterback. If Lamar Jackson does become available, then I think that's something you have to at least consider and take seriously, because Lamar Jackson is one of the best players, one of the most dynamic playmakers in the National Football League. So you have to take, if a top 5 quarterback that young becomes available with the roster that we have, then you obviously have to consider that. So there are 3 different avenues that they could take. I think you do have to consider, as much of an annoyance and a headache he is, and the more I've thought about it, I think it's lesser than what I originally thought about it. The whole Aaron Rodgers situation is interesting. I do think that it's something that they should at least try to at least think about. But those are only the 2 situations that I think you would consider replacing Tua with, even just a little bit. Like, I don't think Derek Carr is viable, and I think Tua honestly has a higher ceiling if he can stay healthy. And yeah, that's really the only thing in terms of replacing him. The more likely situation is that Chris is going to keep him. And I think the 2 things you have to do, I think you have to somehow get a backup quarterback. I'm a big Anthony Richardson fan. They have a 2nd-round pick. Obviously, I think he's probably going to go higher than that. I've seen a lot of people project him falling to the 2nd round, but that could be a very interesting thing that they could do. He's a very good prospect. I think especially him coming in to back up a quarterback, I think would be really beneficial to the team, with a ton, especially with an athlete with that much upside and that talented in this offense would be really, really interesting. And then the other thing, obviously, would be they have to get the offensive line right, and they have to get a playmaker at the running back position. They have to get a 3rd guy. You hear a lot of former players, especially former quarterbacks, say that you at least need 3 guys on your offense that you can rely on a consistent basis. They didn't have that last year, whether it was injuries or just poor play overall. So getting someone like, I think, someone, and honestly, the more I think about it, I like the draft for the running back situation. Someone like a Jahmyr Gibbs, or even a Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs, someone who can get a ton of yards from scrimmage, that they can do multiple things, I think is going to be a crucial part to the offseason. They have to solidify the offensive line as best they can, and they have to get him a run game because it's going to help him, his health moving forward. Not only does it make the team better, but it makes Tua, obviously, his game should go up and his injuries should go down if the offense is more multiple. Because, again, the offense and the success of it predicated on him throwing the football. We were, I think, 26th or 27th in rush yards a game, which is unacceptable. Yeah, we have to take the pressure off of him as a player. And people act like, that's another misconception about, especially going back and watching some of this stuff, like, a lot of it was on him, and the offense was one-dimensional. And yeah, it's nice to have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but when you're one-dimensional, you're one-dimensional. And it was a lot of pressure, and it did hurt the offense, especially in short yardage. I mean, the year came down to short yardage situations, and that was one of the bigger areas of one of the bigger inconsistencies that really hurt the team was those short yardage. Obviously, penalties were another big reason, but they have to they cannot just have him drop back and average 90 yards rushing a game. They just can't do it for another year in a row. They have to somehow get it fixed, and they've been content with their draft picks and the development of their offensive line, but it just doesn't work. It hasn't worked. They need to either address this in free agency or maybe, try to move the board around a little bit in the second round. Maybe you can get somebody there, but he has to accomplish that. He has to accomplish getting him a run game and solidifying the offensive line. I think is and getting a third playmaker is very, very important. This is an interesting story that I've heard a lot of people talk about. This comes from Pro Football Rumors. The Dolphins are hiring Butch Barry as their new offensive line coach, according to Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald. Barry was recently canned by the Broncos after serving as their O-line coach for 1 season. But now he'll get another opportunity in Miami. The veteran coach will be replacing Matt Applebaum, who was let go after 1 season with the Dolphins. He went back to Boston College, if you guys aren't familiar with that. I thought this was weird. I actually was not... I was impressed by what Matt was able to do as our offensive line coach. I thought that he did a good job preparing a lot of different players to get them ready for a game and execute a game plan. I thought they did that at a pretty good clip and a pretty good level. I thought some of the linemen like Liam Eichenberg took a step forward, and Robert Hunt, I think, did take a step forward this year. Helping Connor Williams, that with that transition to being a full-time center, I thought was really pretty seamless, especially with preseason where it kind of started off a little shaky. Getting Brandon Shell ready every week in and week out, I thought was pretty impressive. So it was weird that maybe he just wanted to go back to college. I'm not really sure what the reason was for this, because I don't think he did a poor job. This wasn't like Josh Boyer or Danny Crossman, where it was bad coaching. I thought he did a good job in bringing Butch Barry in, and I know a lot of people wanted Mike Munchak. But bringing Butch Barry in, who has a very checkered coaching past. I mean, some of the things that were said about him leaving Denver are very negative. I don't know much about Butch Barry, so I'm not going to have an opinion on him myself, but from what you hear with some of the tweets that I read from beat writers of the Denver Broncos were very negative. And Mike McDaniel is a very smart man. I think he probably knows a lot. Not probably, he does know a lot more about the game than I do. So I'm going to trust him because so far he's assembled an all-star staff. And, with some of the exceptions, with some of the turnover or leftovers from New England, or not New England, but the Brian Flores era, which were obviously negatives. Those guys didn't do well. I'm going to trust this. But if you guys are interested in learning about Butch Berry, some of the stuff that you find on the internet, not great. Definitely not well liked, at least from the Denver Broncos point of view. This next news story is something that I was personally put on. This is more of it's a story and a question. Why hasn't Vic Fangio been? This is a little bit of a gripe, but it's like, why hasn't he been officially announced as the Dolphins defensive coordinator? Jonathan Gannon was officially introduced as the Colts head coach, or was it Shane Steichen? Excuse me, not Jonathan Gannon. Shane Steichen was officially introduced as the Colts head coach. So it's like, well, then why has Vic Fangio not been officially anointed? And obviously the Eagles have a vacant defensive coordinator spot. It just makes me nervous. It's like, if Jonathan Gannon takes the Cardinals job, then does Vic Fangio, do we get stabbed in the back and he's an Eagles defensive coordinator now? Like, it's very strange, and I hope that gets resolved soon. It makes me a little bit nervous. I know that the Eagles have looked into other people, but it's very strange, and I hope this just kind of officially gets announced soon, because it still hasn't been. And this is a big deal. I know that some of the people that are like, it's a little bit of an overreaction, but it's not an overreaction. He's a really good head coach. I think he fits the defense. Or not head coach, excuse me. He's a really good defensive coordinator. And I think he fits what the defense is. Like, everybody on this defense fits his scheme perfectly. And I think that they can do some special things if Vic is the defensive coordinator. And it's going to help out a lot that he's someone who's had a lot of success in the NFL as opposed to someone who has barely coached in the NFL, which are the other candidates that were, mentioned before. So this is a big deal, and hopefully this can kind of get officially announced soon. But yeah, it's just weird. This next news story comes from Sports Illustrated. It's more of a title. It's not really news, but obviously Derek Carr, if you guys are familiar, has been released, or at least cut, so he's free to go wherever the heck he wants. And the title of the article is, Should the Dolphins Even Kick the Tires on Derek Carr? And again, I already said this earlier in the show, but it is going to be a huge... It's a big offseason for Chris because he has an opportunity for this team to be special. There's just a few tweaks here and there that I think he needs to do to put the team over the edge, solidify the offensive line, add a third playmaker. And I think that's really it. And the Vic Fangio thing is going to be huge. If he's officially a Dolphin, then that's a huge step in the right direction. So they have it. It's going to take really, really tough decision making to get it done. And if that is moving on from Tua, whether that's Aaron Rodgers or Lamar Jackson, then I think that's the right thing to do. But I do think that Tua, going back and not really focusing on how the year ended, because it didn't end well. When he was playing at that level, it was special stuff. This, like, going back and watching it, it definitely makes me more optimistic than I was before. Going into to this season with Tua, it just comes down to health with him, and betting this, because this team is not going to be the same after this upcoming season, unfortunately. I think this year especially can be really special, and all I want as a fan is a home playoff game. I think that's like literally the pinnacle at this point. And it's going to be tough to do that in the AFC, but I think that's something that's very, very achievable with this roster, and I hope they make the right decisions in the offseason. Again, this is another big one. I mean, it's definitely something that he would have to consider. I think he should be thinking about, especially if it's a Pro Bowl level quarterback, which Derek Carr is. it's something you always have to consider and kind of weigh the options. If I was Chris, I wouldn't personally do it. It would take someone like who's a generational, like, that I know is a generational talent, that I know who can stay healthy. That's the only thing I would consider. Because I think Tua is on his way to that. But again, if he has another concussion next year, that could easily cut his career short. And then then what do we do? And then the season's ruined again. And that's another prime of this roster that's just gone down the toilet. So again, it's gonna take great care. And this is going to be the most important offseason of his career as a Dolphins GM. Before we get into the fan Q&A, I wanted to bring up a few players that I really like. And these are, to me, in terms of offseason dream acquisitions, these are the three that I just adore. I think Anthony Richardson is one of them. I really like his game. Very talented quarterback. Very underrated. Was on a bad Florida team. And I think is one of the better quarterbacks in the draft. The fact that I think he's being undervalued in my opinion. And then Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama, one of the best two-way running backs to come out of college in a long time. If you look, first of all, if you just watch him play football, he's a playmaker, and that's something the Dolphins need. He's a great running back. He's a great receiver. I think in this offense, he can kind of do some of that Kyle Juszczyk stuff that they like to do in Chicago or in San Francisco, and he can be that running back that we desperately need in this offense. I think he fits the scheme too. The run, the vision, the cutting. I think it's all there, and he's a phenomenal receiver. He had on 151 attempts, he had 926 rushing yards, with 7 touchdowns to average 6 yards a carry, and that's in the SEC. He has a long of 76, very athletic. His receiving stats is what's super impressive. He averaged 10 yards a catch from the backfield on 44 catches, 444 yards. He had his longest reception was 60 yards, and he had 3 receiving touchdowns. So he's a great two-way player and can affect the game in a lot of different ways, and I think this would be a phenomenal addition to the Dolphins offense. And again, that's somebody you're not going to have to pay a lot of money to. He's probably going to fall to the second round. You can move up to get him if you want to. And it's not like it's not like a Saquon Barkley, which I'm not against at all, where you would have to pay him a lot of money. And then the third guy I think is pretty obvious, the Mike McGlinchey thing. The connection with Mike McDaniel obviously is big. He's one of the best, if not the best, run-blocking tackles in the NFL. Very athletic, and would definitely help Tua's career a lot moving forward. So Mike McGlinchey might actually be the crown jewel of the offseason, because he does fix a lot of the issues the Dolphins have dealt with. When's the last time they would have had a tackle duo like a Teron Armstead and a Mike McGlinchey? And a Mike McGlinchey, excuse me. And it would have been, I guess you could say Brandon Albert and maybe Laramie Tunsil and Juwan James. That offensive line was good. But it wouldn't be as good as that offensive line. That would be a phenomenal line with Hunt and Connor inside. And the other guard position really wouldn't matter all that much. So that actually might be the crown jewel. If they have to move some cap around to do it, then they should. Because again, if Tua is the guy and you think, okay, we can go forward with him, we trust his health, then give him every opportunity to help. Judo obviously is what it is, but help him on the field to not get hurt. And I think that's. And again, we heard that from both sides of the Chiefs and Eagles about what's the most important thing on the field to help a quarterback. And the first thing they said was the offensive line. So that might actually be the crown jewel of the offseason if they can get that deal done. That would be a phenomenal pickup. I think he's dealt with some injuries throughout his career, like a little bit, but for the most part, he's pretty healthy. And I think those 3 players, Anthony Richardson, Gibbs, and Mike McGlinchey, I think those 3 players could help the Dolphins out a lot. if they were able to acquire them. And honestly, they could get Gibbs and McGlinchey and that's like some shooting star stuff, right? I understand that. I mean, that is literally like. But if I was the GM of the team, those would be some of the guys that I would seriously target. And Howie Roseman talked about that. Like, they really wanted Hassan Reddick going into free agency. That was their number one guy. They were able to execute that. I feel like for the Dolphins, Mike McGlinchey has to be. How old is Mike McGlinchey? He has. I mean, obviously off of his rookie deal. He's going to command obviously a lot of money, but it's too important, and it makes too much sense. He's played in this scheme. He's 28 years old, 6'8". I mean, dude, listen, everybody. This would be a phenomenal pickup. If they were able to get him. So who knows? I mean, I liked Mike McGlinchey coming out of college too. And again, it just makes too much sense. I mean, the Dolphins really need him. We've heard Chris Kerr continue to talk really I don't know if it's because he picked him in the first round, but he continues to talk about Austin Jackson. Like, it's like, okay, listen, we've tried it, everybody. Like, yeah, just turn on any Bills game that Austin Jackson has ever played in his career, and I think you have your answer if he's a good tackle or not. Anytime we play a quality defense, he plays his worst football. So I would. And again, very finesse tackle. He's not good in the run game either. Someone like Mike McGlinchey just makes too much sense. But that's pretty much it for that. Let's get into the fan Q&A. I swear to God, if he goes into the season again with talking about Austin Jackson, and I mean, even the fact that I was about to say what I was about to say, maybe I'm wrong. I guess maybe I could be. But for the facts are the facts, and again, just look at the tape. I mean, this first question comes from Beef. He says, "Hey Skaggs, how ecstatic were you when you found out Zach Thomas was finally inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame? Seeing the announcement made at the house, there's probably wasn't a dry eye from Dolphins fans and those who liked watching him." Absolutely. One of the few players from that era that are really underrated that get talked about very highly. People, Hall of Famers, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, or, some of the comments that they made about him, and other players too that have played him, like Trent Dilfer, talked about how great of a player and how great of a defense that was, and Zach Thomas. It's just strange that it took this long for him to get in. But one of the best players in the history of the team, one of the best defensive players in the history of the team, and the Dolphins have had a lot of really good defensive players. I know he has the most Pro Bowls, I think, out of any other defensive player that we've had, even more than Jason Taylor. And he's just a great, phenomenal player. And, the first thing I thought of, and I know this is kind of awful to think about, but the first thing I thought of was, like, the Dolphins really had two Hall of Famers on that defense, and we already knew that defense was great, but it just makes it even more sad that they couldn't build something greater with that team, because the defense was there, the offense was so bad in that era. I don't think people realize that. Like, I would encourage, I mean, if you're a new Dolphins fan, go back and watch some of those games. It's hard to watch. Like, even the Ricky Williams years is a great example. That team was really good, and the quarterback play was just really, really poor. And that's honestly the first thing I was like, man, that team had two great defensive players on it, and you saw what the Ravens were able to do with that type of setup, and the Dolphins just could never, for whatever reason. I mean, we don't know, not for whatever reason, but they just couldn't get stability at the coaching. They had a lot of changes throughout his career in Miami. Jason and Zach did, and couldn't get the quarterback situation figured out. This next question comes from a user. He says, "What is the most important position group do you think we need to address in the draft?" In the draft, that depends on free agency, but I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I would say, if we missed out on Mike McGlinchey, maybe you consider a tackle there. I don't really know too much about the class itself to have like, oh, this is the guy that I really like, especially in the second round. But yeah, I would say one of the other things that I would say in the draft the Dolphins have to get right is special teams. They need a punt returner and a kick returner. Maybe they can get someone like a two-way player, like a corner, someone like a Marcus Jones, which is what New England did. I think that would be somewhere they definitely need to invest in the draft. So to answer your question, I would say special teams, definitely get a punt / kick returner, because it was, other than the Cedric Wilson return in the playoffs, it was one of the worst special team years I've ever seen as a Dolphins fan. So I hope we all hope that improves for sure. This next question comes from Mark Jefferson. He says, how far away from the Super Bowl do you think we are? Not far. I think if we can solidify the offensive line, if Vic Fangio becomes official, then I think really if you're Chris Greer and you can get, let's say you can get, let's just in a perfect world, if you get Mike McGlinchey, the Vic thing is official, you go into the draft and you're like, well, we really just have a bunch of luxury picks at this point. We can focus on playmaking at the special teams, in the special teams department. We can get to a running back someone like a Gibbs who can affect the game from many different areas. Like, I think it just kind of expands on what you can do in the draft, especially if you can solidify the offensive line. So I would say that's really it. I think we could definitely win a Super Bowl. Then it would just depend on Tua's health as a quarterback. But other than that, yeah, like I feel like, and something else that I want to say before going back and watching Tua's games, did he have, I think his worst game looking back at it was the San Francisco game. And I don't think there's really any debate about that. I'm not counting the Packers game because of the injury. That was his worst game of that year. But one of the things when I was going back and watching it, his Buffalo game, and I was watching, and I was just coming off of watching old quarterbacks try to play in Buffalo in like the early 2000s, and some of the guys that, Jay Fielder and the Lucas, I can't remember his name right now, and some of the other players that went through here really struggled to throw in that stadium, and Tua really didn't have any issues on that night throwing the football. And I don't know, I just feel like watching him from year 2 to year 3, it was just a significant improvement. Like, I don't think people really realize how much of, like, it really was almost like watching two different players. So I think that's a positive thing for sure. The Dolphins fans have to look forward to if Tua is around for another season. So to answer your question, Mark, I just don't. It's pretty. They're right there. It depends on what Chris does in the offseason, and they can't. It just, again, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And he would be insane if he just went into another season with the same guys at offensive line. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Let me know who are your favorite offseason acquisitions for the Dolphins to get. And I'll see you guys in the next one.